Okay, so let's yap about Classic Plus. It seems like everyone's got a video talking about what they think Classic Plus should be, so why don't you listen to what I think Classic Plus should be? Um, to start off with, why should you care what I have to say? I'm just another classic WoW guy. I think I have 560 days played on Classic World of Warcraft. I have a large breadth and depth of experience playing Classic WoW. I have played in speedrun guilds, boss parse groups. I have some rank 1 world parses in Season of Discovery. I know it's a bit of a joke. I've played in pug groups. I've played in dedicated guild groups, same people week to week. I've played in progression groups. I was, the top 1 or 2% of the player base, killing heroic Lich King 25-man week 5. I've played in casual dad groups, that don't even clear the content. So I do a lot of different stuff, and I experience the game in a lot of different ways. I think I have a good perspective on it. So let's get to what the hell I think. And I think overall, my main point on what Classic Plus should be is that Classic Plus should be designed for the casual player. Raids should be designed to largely be puggable. I don't want to see in-game systems like normal mode versus heroic mode raids that delineate between good, air quotes, good and bad players. There should just be one raid mode, and it should really be aimed at the casual, what I would call the play for fun player, as opposed to the more hardcore or play to win player. And I think this, my basis for this is basically just, I think the casual classic WoW audience is just way, way bigger than the audience of players that want a hardcore, serious, you need to be locked in, you need to be focused to be able to achieve this difficult content. I just think it would appeal to a lot more people if you made it focused for the casual audience. So I have a couple of points to go over here. We're going to spend the most time on this one, and I'm going to talk about some other things, but there'll be more stuff later, and if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be time-stamped in the video description for the other points. So I think the casual audience is bigger. It's I think it's a good way for Classic to differentiate itself from retail, where retail has some of the most ridiculously hard content. It has a difficulty mode for everyone. I think Classic should basically just be easy mode, and that would be a good way for it to differentiate itself from retail. And I think when there are more features and content that are in the game that are for hardcore players and largely not accessed by casual players, the casual players are more likely to quit. They see that content and then they say, that's not for me. And eventually they say, this game isn't for me, when they see enough things in the game that aren't for them. So, there's a hard mode raids that have the best loot in the game. They say, well, the best loot in the game, I'd have to log in, attend a serious raid guild, play on a schedule, meet all these expectations of that raid guild to be able to clear that content and get the best gear. And, they just say, F that, it's not for me. Whereas when the raids and the best gear available in the game is put behind a much lower barrier, it's much more accessible to a wider range of players. And I think it makes that a better experience for them. And I think especially the combination of having a normal / heroic split of raid difficulties, and then they have either better loot or more loot or different rewards in the heroic mode is especially toxic. This is especially bad when you have the variable difficulties and you put better shit in the hard mode. Because the casual player, in clearing their normal mode, for one, the game is literally telling them they're playing it in easy mode, and it creates a much less satisfying experience. But they're going to loot something in normal mode and say something, think to themselves, well, this isn't the best, but it's the best I'm going to get, a casual player might say. And it's just such a worse experience than, like, killing Kel'Thuzad and seeing Gressel Dawn of Ruin drop and being like, oh my god, Gressel Dawn of Ruin, the best sword in the game, just dropped, and I'm about to roll for it, or whatever. You know, making Gressel accessible to most players is much better than making it accessible to only the elite players, you know? And, you know, another side effect of this, like, normal heroic split with more / better / different rewards is, you know, when the difficulty is too high for the average player and desirable rewards are in the raid, gatekeeping behavior becomes more common. And this, I think that mostly negatively impacts the experience of the casual players. The player who's getting gatekept out of the raid. And the people doing the gatekeeping, I don't think are the bad guys. You know, they want to get the rewards. They know the average player can't do the raid. So they need to exclude average players if they want to have a reasonable expectation of getting those rewards. The problem is that, like, the game becomes too hard for the average players. And, like, so I want to identify that, like, the people doing gatekeeping aren't the bad guys. It's the design of the game that, like, necessitates the gatekeeping that causes a problem. The exclusion of the average player is a predictable outcome of making a raid that an average player is likely to hinder or slow down a group. So, yeah, okay, I think I hammered that point home of, like, I really don't want to see difficult content in raids, especially. Because it just leads to so many negative things, I think. And I think the costs absolutely outweigh the benefits. There is absolutely a segment of the player base that enjoys that difficulty and wants to pursue that challenge. And I just think, like, you're better served by, you know, saying, you know, for the players that want that difficulty, for them to invent their own challenges, like speedrunning and boss parsing and things like that. But don't make the base game, you know, present those challenges that a average player is unlikely to overcome, you know? So, second point, the only thing that's been exciting about retail that I've read about recently, I'm not a retail player, but I have read about how retail is making, you know, significant changes to the UI and plans to just ban all add-ons, or combat add-ons. I think it's all combat add-ons. I would love to see that in Classic Plus. I think add-ons are another thing that, like, add a barrier to entry to the game, an additional complication. Like, if the baseline UI is just not good enough and you need to solve it with third-party add-ons, that's a problem. Deuces, I see a lot of you guys have questions. I'm going to keep yapping through my list of things, and we'll do questions and comments and, you know, Reddit level rebuttals, at the end. So I got a bit more yapping to do. There will be a questions and answer section at the end. So, right, where was I? Yeah, I think it would be good if we had, you know, built in, like, a boss timer, damage meter, and some ability to show important buffs and debuffs, or, like, ability cooldowns, for your specialization. Like, the relevant information you need to play the game should be able to be displayed clearly with the default UI. Yeah, and, like, right now, it's just absolutely not that. So I'm very excited about that what they're working on in retail to make it so that they can just ban all add-ons. You know, part of Blizzard's add-on policy is that they disallow, you know, according to their policy, you cannot have paid access add-ons. All the code has to be public, free of charge to download. You can't have paid access premium versions of add-ons. But, you know, we all know that paid access add-ons are pretty prolific in classic WoW. And it confuses me as to why Blizzard doesn't enforce this. Some of these add-ons, they work around, some kind of technicality of being like, oh, well, the add-on's free, but the guide content, that makes the add-on actually function, that's what you're paying for. Or like, I've been in groups, like there's a boss mods add-on that, has, largely replaced DBM or bigwigs. It is a paid access add-on, and that is so prolific that I've been in raid groups now that literally require members to have this paid access add-on to participate. Or they say, like, if you don't have this paid access add-on, you can't join their group. And it's like, Jerome knows. Jerome's been in those groups with me. Yeah, it's true, he says. And it's just like, I don't want to deal with any of that. It's such a negative to my game experience. One, that I have to manage multiple different add-ons to get a serviceable UI, update them, and all that crap. Two, that they allow these paid access add-ons to run rampant. And like, the more they allow them to run rampant, like, the more new add-on developers are just going to be like, well, why don't I just structure my add-on in a way that I can make it paid access? Because that seems to be apparently allowed now. Why wouldn't they do that and start getting paid? A lot of content creators lock their, like, custom UI behind a paywall of like, oh, if you're subscribed, then you can get my weak auras or whatever. Damage. Not true. Let me plug my own weak auras. Not true for mine. Mine are all totally freely available on the Simonized Show Discord. Link in the video description, link below the stream, link in the stream chat. I've never paywalled any of that, but I just want to see no add-ons in Classic WoW, just like they're doing for retail. That's like the most exciting thing I've read about retail in quite a while. Special K84, thank you very much for the Prime Gaming. 12 months of support, so you've earned your Top Hat sub badge now. Congratulations, and also thank you. So third point, I would like a large serving of new zones, quests, and dungeons for the leveler. I think the main good reason, good thing that happens when you put a lot of fresh leveling content in is I think more fresh leveling content will incentivize players to make multiple characters. If there's so many zones and quests and dungeons that you can level one guy up and miss half of it, hell yeah, you're gonna level a second guy. I think that'd be great. And I would say that you ought to try to insert items that have some kind of utility or convenience, lasting value into the leveling content. Like large bags, an item that's teleports you somewhere, that's a big convenience, or things like a nifty stopwatch or carrot on a stick that are kind of like mechanically unique or kind of special. These help you feel like your character is growing and collecting these, interesting and useful things.
Thanks for the great content.
Niveki, thank you very much for the Prime Gaming. Thank you so much for 7 months of support. I really appreciate that. So, items like bags, teleporters, nifty stopwatch, whatever, they help you feel like you're collecting and growing rather than just replacing another gear slot for +2 agility, the minor stat replacements, they serve their purpose. Absolutely, there should still be those, but try to be sure to include the other stuff too. I would say a good goal for the quantity of content is I want to be able to level 2 characters of the same faction and not do the same quest twice and not run out of quests to do either. That's kind of like, in my mind, that's the goal. 2 characters, like, maybe I start a Night Elf and I go in Teldrassil and then, Darkshore and then Ashenvale and then this zone and then that zone, and I make it all the way to max level. And then I make a Dwarf and I do completely different zones. and I never run out of quests, and I never do the same quest twice. That's kind of the volume of content I would want to see. Yaguno, hello, welcome to the stream. Thank you very much for the Prime Gaming. I appreciate that, and I hope you're having a great day. Okay, so that was point number 3. Lots more leveling content. Fourth point, this is a kind of a big point also. Slow the pace of gear replacement in the max level raids. Design the items so that maybe 1/2 or at most 2/3 of a player's gear gets replaced in a new raid. I think I'd trend more towards the 1/2 of your gear getting replaced. This helps to diminish the gear treadmill feeling and add significance to looting powerful items. You know, I feel like in, you know, what I've played of Mist of Pandaria, it's just like, man, you know, when an item is 5 or item levels higher, it almost doesn't matter anything else about the item. You just replace it, you know? And it's like every raid is just going to have this big spike in item levels, and it's just like none of my stuff prior is going to matter at all. And like that's bad. I think you want items like Onslaught Girdle, Band of Acuria, Drakefang Talisman, Neltharian's Tear, these type of items that are like, you know, a lot of different players want them, a lot of different classes want them, and they last for multiple phases. So it feels significant when you get that Band of Acuria. It feels significant when you get that Neltharian's Tear, because you know it's going to last you at least through this phase and next phase, and then, like, maybe if you're lucky, you replace it the phase after that. And having these chase items, these are like, not just these chase items, but having, you know, less of your gear get replaced every tier means you're going to have more players doing the, like, content that's 1 or 2 phases old. And what that helps you do is it helps you form groups for that content, because you have geared and experienced players still chasing a couple of items out of that raid, that are then able to bring in a lot of fresh players that can absorb all the, like, unneeded items, and helps get those newer players, like, into the system, right? Right, so that's good. I think you could try to go, I don't know if it really works for World of Warcraft to have more of a, like, horizontal progression design, because I think that would be the dream, to, like, eternally add content that is within the power range of, like, Molten Core to Naxxramas, and you never bump ahead of Naxxramas, but you just keep adding stuff in between. But I'm not sure if that would really work. You could maybe do that in a way of, like, adding set bonuses that enable different builds, basically. So it's not, like, necessarily a stronger build, but it's a different build and a different way to play your character, but you stay within this, like, power bracket of, like, Molten Core to Naxxramas. So it's not, like, endless power creep. I don't know if that would work in the World of Warcraft, like, environment, but I think it would be pretty cool. So that's kind of like an aside. So fifth major point is we need some changes to the classes. Like, we need more viable tanks than just warriors. Tanks are, like, an essential part of forming a group, and, you know, in classic WoW, it's like warriors are just hands down clearly the best tank. There's some situations where you might say a feral druid is viable, but let's be real, warriors are basically the only tank. And you need tanks in every group, and, like, warriors happen to be the best damage dealer. Also, it's like, it's ridiculous. So I think, you know, you want to make feral druid an actually viable tank. You probably want to make paladin and shaman into actually viable tanks, where, you know, most groups are totally fine using any of those tanks. And then I'd say you want, like, maybe 1 to 2 more abilities per class. Could be good to help with balance and flesh out more gameplay variety. I think Season of Discovery absolutely, like, added a bunch of abilities, and it went way overboard. It went way too much with too many additions and too much complexity to the classes. It became hard to keep track of everything that's going on. So not as much additions as Season of Discovery gave, but you definitely need more than what like the baseline vanilla classes had. And then on the note of changes and updates, I would say numerical balance is important. You know, as much as I say the game is like, I want it to be designed for the casual audience, you know, no matter how easy it ends up being, if we have balance like we have in Classic Era, players will inevitably stack warriors and meme on Ret Paladins. And I think it'd be better if players could play multiple different builds and have them be, you know, roughly competitive. I'd aim for like a 10 or maybe 15% gap in DPS performance between like the top performing spec and the worst performing spec. And then like players can just play what they want and not feel like they're griefing their raid. You know, if you message someone in Classic Era and say you're a Ret Paladin trying to join their Temple of AQ, they're probably going to tell you to F off or just not even respond to you at all, because like the output of that class is just, or that specialization is just such a joke compared to, you know, any random mage, warrior, or rogue they could get that like actually contributes a meaningful amount of damage. It's like, it's stupid that those that there are so many specs in like the classic vanilla version of the game that are just so numerically bad that they're worthless. And it's just like, I don't think it hurts anything to bring them up so that like the people could just play what they feel like, you know. Novalock says good Ret Paladins are bad and players should feel bad for picking it. That is one approach, yes. And then, okay, my last thing is not like a major point about the design of the game, but I would say change to world buffs. My proposed change to world buffs. There's a lot of people that say like, oh, world buffs are great, you know, stack 8 world buffs together, Omega Blast the raid. Other people that are like, I don't want to log in and, you know, do the chore of collecting world buffs before I can go to the raid, and like it feels bad when you die. So like there's definitely two sides to this coin. My proposed change would be make it so you can only have one active world buff at a time. And you'd like rebalance the effect of the buffs so they're all like competitive with each other. And then you also make the world buffs give you a unique consumable item in your inventory instead of a active buff on your character. So like you're in Stormwind when Onyxia goes out. If you don't have a world buff active on your character already and you don't have a world buff item in your inventory already, the buff goes out, you just get a little item in your inventory. It says like unique 1 world buff, so you can't go and collect like an Onyxia, a Songflower, or whatever item. You can only have one item and you can only have one buff active at a time. When you choose to click that item, it gives you the buff for an hour or 2 hours or whatever, and disallows you from getting other world buffs. So then it's like, you pick whichever world buff is appropriate for what you're doing. You're still going out in the world and collecting some buffs, so you still have that like juiced up feeling a little bit, but not nearly to the extent of having 8 different world buffs stacked on top of each other, which, you know, also, you know, then if you're not trying to stack 8 buffs at once, then, you know, if you die, you don't lose as much. And if you, you're also not doing so much chores to maintain them every time you want to. So that's my idea how I'd change world buffs. Right. So, I said we would have questions and answers at the end. Does anyone have, questions, thoughts, opinions, about what I said? Just a flask with more steps? Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is a flask with more steps. I think it would be a good change. Danish Lurker says, I like trains. Okay, good addition. Lojack says, world buffs are my absolute least favorite part of Classic. Anything on PvP. I don't really participate in PvP, so I don't really have an opinion on that. Hocus Pocus says, great takes on Classic Plus. I agree. I know we had some questions earlier, so I'm just waiting to see if you guys have questions now. Miss Stallion says, if they have dual spec and some healers are flexing to DPS, they could get screwed out of BIS buffs for universal ones. Maybe. I'd be most excited for slightly more viable paladin / shaman tanks. Yeah, like having multiple viable tanks seems like a good change. I don't know if I would want to see rogue tank or warlock tank or mage healer like there was in Season of Discovery. That like might be a little bit much. Like as much as I loved rogue tank, it's definitely not, you know, being a tank isn't the class fantasy I signed up for when I created a rogue. I mean, rogue tank, you know, whether it was powerful or not, was an extremely low play rate specialization in Season of Discovery. Very, very few people played rogue tank that showed up in any, like, Warcraft logs compared to other tanks where there were way more of them. Rartar says rank 14 weapons being the best is not affecting you. I think that's dumb. If like you can get rank 14 weapons and rank 14 gear, yeah, like it is on Anniversary. I mean, the Anniversary PvP system, I think was overall a failure. They changed it from being like you have to do the most PvP each week to rank up of everyone, so it was like this turbo sweaty thing that the majority of players were like, okay, it's unreasonable to expect someone to get rank 14. Then they changed it into like a basic point progression where like you do X amount of PvP, no matter how much PvP other people do, you're going to rank up. And then it became something that's like, you know, much more accessible. It's not like only the top 1% get this. It's much more accessible. So then the problem is it became expected. And when the rank 14 gear became expected, and it's so good that it invalidates a lot of the stuff you would get from raids, that's just like obviously bad design. One, you're just repeatedly doing Alterac Valley. It's super boring gameplay. No one likes that. Sorry, I need to correct myself. Almost no one likes that. I'm sure there are people that like that, but normal people, let's say, don't like doing hundreds of AVs a week or whatever the rate was. And then it just like invalidates a lot of the excitement you would otherwise have from getting loot in raids because you just already got a bunch of good stuff. What's your opinion for level cap increases? Asks Aaron Black. Level cap increases, like in Season of Discovery. I think in Season of Discovery, I think the level bracketing system was incredibly genius. Like, I would never have said to do level caps before seeing them implemented in Season of Discovery. It wasn't even on my radar. And what the level caps did in Season of Discovery is they made players approach content in a way they didn't approach it before. So it essentially revitalized and breathed life into a lot of content that already existed. Just by limiting the player level to level 25, all of a sudden, there are a lot of quest lines, like in Ashen Vale, that no one's skipping, because like the belt from the water elementals gives the best gear the best belt available for Horde. Okay, cool. Wow. That's now the best thing you can get. You know, these dungeons that used to be run once or twice for leveling gear are now run, you know, repeatedly because they provide your best, you know, pre-raid best in slot pre-raid best in slot gear. So it causes, you know, existing content to be approached in a very different way. And it also makes it feel like when you have level brackets, there's like an upper limit on how far behind you could feel if you weren't like in there already. Leveling all the way to 60 in like vanilla era servers is a massive, massive time commitment. And if you're seeing like streamers and your friends, like they're already in Blackwing Lair, they're already in AQ40, you know, the amount of time investment you would have to put in to be able to do that content with them basically just means you're not going to do that content with them, like realistically. So I'm not sure if level brackets would be a good thing for Classic Plus or not. I'm leaning towards no. And while there are a lot of positives to level brackets, I think the goal with Classic Plus should, like, be that you make the leveling interesting enough that, like, players are interested to do the leveling, and then you just, like, let them level as much as they want, you know? Like, you don't need to cap them intermittently if there's, a wealth of fun, interesting content to do, that the leveling doesn't feel like a chore. Because if the leveling doesn't feel like a chore, then your friend who's doing Blackwing Lair, you can catch up to him in a couple weeks and start doing Blackwing Lair, but you're going to have fun doing it versus, if the leveling is boring, it just feels like a chore you have to get out of the way before you can get to the good stuff. So ideally, the leveling experience becomes a good and interesting thing and not a chore, and then level brackets are not needed. But if that can't be achieved, then maybe level brackets are a good thing. CK says, any idea for badass new raid/dungeon/zone content like Hyjal or Emerald Dream? No, I'm not really, like, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about, like, specific pieces of content that I would want, or zones or whatever. Like, if Blizzard needs any ideas for new dungeons or new zones to do, like, after they win the Turtle WoW lawsuit, they can just copy it all from Turtle WoW, Turtle WoW copied their entire game to begin with, so, like, why wouldn't Blizzard just copy Turtle WoW's zones for Classic Plus? I think that would be an absolute hilarious W for Blizzard if they bring out a Classic Plus type of content. At this point, I'm not even confident that it will exist, but we'll say if. But I think it would be hilarious if they actually just copied a bunch of the zones from Turtle WoW or other private servers. Like, the private servers copied their game to begin with, so, fair's fair, I would say. Give me Uldum or give me death, says Sofuskaka. So you want to see a Uldum dungeon. Timbermaw hold 10-man raid? Okay, that could be cool. Let me see. Moralex says, I want to achieve something when I'm playing 5 to 6 hours a day. Currently, if I don't have log, I'm not getting invited. And if I get invited, I have to do more than X DPS to roll for stuff. I don't have any chance to obtain tier 2, 2.5, or whatever. So are you you're playing on Anniversary now? And you're just not having a very hard time getting into groups, you're saying? Yeah, I think, I'm not playing on Anniversary servers, but I've seen a lot of content about Anniversary servers, and I feel like the main problem with the Anniversary servers is you have a significantly higher concentration of these play-to-win hardcore type of players, performance-oriented players in the ecosystem, in the game. And I don't want to play with those type of people. In all my experience playing Classic WoW, I've come to the conclusion that, like, playing with groups of people that are, hyper-focused on performance, have a lot of expectations of their players, they're, like, running splits to feed gear to their mains. Yes, this does happen in Classic WoW. I have participated in groups that do that, playing on a schedule, competing for your raid spot, all this kind of, like, it's just, it's the wrong type of player that you want playing your game, in my opinion, because they tend to be really, like, antagonistic towards new players or players who aren't as experienced or whatever, which is why I think you, like, actively want to avoid catering towards that, like, competitive type of player, and you want to actively try to cater towards the casual type of player. V-Fiend says, just tuning in and catching this convo, would a progression system in Classic Plus, such as you need T1 before you can use T2 gear? Example, T2 chest drops in a broken state that needs you to own a T1 chest to fix and wear the T2. That could be interesting. I think it would create a lot of friction for the players of, like, you know, they can't... I don't know, it would, like, slow or lock or gate their progress into more content because they got unlucky and didn't get, you know, X or Y tier 1 item that they need to unlock the tier 2 stuff. I think the plus side to a system like that is, like, you no longer, like, hit max level and skip to the current raid and get carried to some gear. Like, you do the Molten Core, then you do the Blackwing Lair, then you do the whatever. You know, that would be the upside to that system, but I think it might, you know, you might need some refinement on that to make it so it didn't feel like it was, you know, gatekeeping the players from the progression they wanted to experience. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I think the Mists of Pandaria servers are back up. And for anyone that missed the drama today, the weekly maintenance for the Mists of Pandaria servers introduced a new bug on the servers that caused a memory leak and caused the game to crash shortly after logging in. And even if you could log in, your bags were sometimes gone, all your gold was sometimes gone, you sometimes had unlearned skills, and your equipped gear was sometimes gone. They really screwed the pooch with this week's weekly maintenance. But supposedly it's fixed by now. Aaron Black says, Tarnished Undermine coin from SOD needs to be in Classic Plus. I do think Tarnished Undermine coins were very good, and I think the main good thing they did in Season of Discovery was that they made it so... they basically helped keep the cost of raid consumables very low. So there were a lot of players that really just wanted to raid, right? And if you can get Undermine coins from raiding, and then you can turn those into herbs and potions and whatever, you can largely... That massively increases the supply of the raid consumables, of your flasks, your sharpening stones, your food buffs, your whatevers, because, you know, everyone who's raiding is just getting these coins that then produce these materials that helps keep the cost low, so it feels like you don't have to, like, farm for hours to get your consumables to do your raid. So that was definitely a good feature.